I think, you know what, you will be disrupted. So you need to pick up whether you want to be internally disrupted, which you might control, or you will be for sure externally disrupted.
I mean, if you look at data in an enterprise, so 90% of the data is typically unstructured data, documents, images, increasingly also videos.
So having unstructured data and just blindly saying it's fine, I have a Gen AI tool that will figure it out is, probably a shortcut.
Welcome to the podcast, AI and Data in a Spotlight. And I'm Alice Vaskova, and I will be the host of this podcast. And I have here two experts, Christine and Olivier. Christine, can you start and introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Christine Legner. I'm professor at HEC Lausanne, and I'm also heading the Competence Center Corporate Data Quality, where we work with large multinational organizations on topics related to data management and data strategies.
And Olivier?
And I'm Olivier Verscheure. I'm a professor in computer science at EPFL, and I'm the director of the Swiss Data Science Center, a joint initiative of about 130 professionals, joint initiative between EPFL and ETH Zurich.
Good morning. So, what is the topic of the discussion today? It's gonna be what's hot in AI and data domain. What would be that for you, Olivier? What about the bubble?
What is hot, you mean?
Yeah. What about the bubble, AI bubble?
Yeah, that might be the hottest thing at the moment. Is AI a bubble? And if I were to venture an answer, I would say it's too early to say. It's true that there are a lot of investments made in AI, and we haven't seen the gap between this level of investment and the value that AI brings. At least, when I have to be a bit more specific here, we're talking about Gen AI or generative AI. But the gap between the level of investment and the value that people get from these Gen AI applications is still very large. We have a feeling, and we think we see that the gap is actually closing at the moment. It might take some more time to close, so it's too early to say whether AI is a bubble or not. But we have signs that seems to be showing that AI is actually not a bubble. If the pace of value increasing from these Gen AI apps continues in its trajectory, I think AI is not going to be a bubble.
So, what does it mean for the companies? What should they do in this situation?
Well, that's a good question, actually, because I don't think companies have the luxury to bet on the fact that AI is going to be a bubble. And the reason being that things are moving fast, and this going into AI requires a transformation, which for a company of a given size does take time. And so companies might as well start as soon as possible and not waiting until they have a clear sign, a deterministic sign that AI is not a bubble. I think AI is, something that has to be taken seriously and not betting on the fact that it's going to be a bubble.
So, what does it mean, Christine, to drive transformation for the company?
I perhaps would like to still stay a little bit with the bubble because I think it's very natural. We have seen technology bubbles over and over again. And of course, in the case of AI, at the moment, what we face that everybody can touch AI. So with Gen AI, suddenly everybody is possibly user of a Gen AI technology. Everybody sees potentials, but also perhaps risks. And this is a little bit a similar situation that we also had with a smartphone, for instance. So when suddenly with the iPhone, everybody had actually a very powerful mobile device in his or her hands. And this changes completely the possibilities on the one hand of the technologies, but also typically takes some time, especially for business, on how to leverage the potentials of the technologies, but also how to understand how to eventually create value from it. So in the end, I think we are in this phase that we have seen several times with internet, with smartphones, now with Gen AI, where technologies get democratized to a large extent, and companies somehow face broad adoption, but they still do not have the the most specific and most valuable cases. So these still have to develop. And at the moment, I think the companies are more and more aware, on the one hand side, that they have to invest in these technologies, but on the other hand, they are still struggling and would like to build them really into their general business model, business processes, and this is, I think, then what will happen in the next phase.
I think that's why, like McKinsey research shows right now, that 2/3 of companies are still in pilot and experimentation phase. So still trying to really link the technology back to their business objectives or strategic priorities, right?
Yes, for sure.
Yeah, and maybe this is something, I mean, I alluded to the fact that, Gen AI was not traditional AI, and maybe we want to spend a bit of time on that because I think this report is about AI in general, not just the generative AI part. So traditional AI still generates a lot of value. And as a matter of fact, at the Swiss Data Science Center, half of the companies that we work with have a business use case that requires or at least can be solved with traditional AI. Um, Generative AI and more commonly the large language models, these large language models, this is where the value is not entirely clear, but still the other half of the companies that actually coming to the Swiss Data Science Center are asking for a use case based on Gen AI, which is usually a relatively simple use case at the moment that requires a RAG or a retrieval augmented generative solution system. And a RAG system is still a relatively simple system. We're talking about agentic systems right now, and some companies are actually jumping into agentic. This is the part that is still a bit unclear. We have to keep in mind that traditional AI still generates values for companies.
So how fast you see this move from Gen AI to agentic AI? There is such a promise of automation, productivity, very attractive for any company. How realistic you see that it will really become a reality, and when?
I would not try to venture into saying when. I mean, things have been moving so fast lately. When you see the development of drag and drop tools to actually build agentic systems that have popped up in the past months, I mean, it's amazing the speed of development of those things. And yes, I mean, from what we see today, um, which is more than what we saw last week, probably, right? In these agentic systems, we do see value generation from these agentic systems. And at the pace at which things are being developed right now, I mean, within 6 months to 1 year, I do believe that these agentic systems will actually pop up. And many of the companies that are reaching out to the Swiss Data Science Center will no longer just ask for a RAG system, but will ask for an agentic system. But again, this has developed at a speed which is that unseen before. It's amazing.
I think what is also quite interesting in the current movements, when Gen AI was originally popped up, I mean, we were thinking about content creation, about supporting marketing, supporting creative industries. And now actually this has completely shifted. In some of the reports, it's also very visible. So suddenly you realize that eventually this technology helps also with a lot of the very mundane tasks in back office, for instance, because people are just more naturally interacting with a chatbot, or they can find information about, I don't know, policies, or when they can take their holidays eventually. So we have also seen a lot of these RAG applications in that just make knowledge that is somehow hidden in a lot of documents available for everybody in the organization in a very accessible way. And suddenly we see that with agentic systems that we can automate also, not automate, but support and augment workflows that have been tedious. For instance, I mean, we are at the moment working on a lot of projects for traditional data entry, data search, data cleaning activities are supported also with generative AI. And we are conducting prompting sessions with a lot of these people who are actually working more in back office jobs. And they are always surprised, and we are only at the very beginning on what they can eventually get out. So the technology helps to, on the one hand, really find information very easily and make it available. But on the other hand, it also helps to scale some specialized tasks and bring them a little bit closer to business people, so that have perhaps not the expertise. And this actually creates very interesting situations or questions also about the future, because you can suddenly scale. And with agents, I have seen quite a number of very interesting pilots where eventually you try to propose some templates, and agents eventually supporting then, I don't know, salespeople or people really at the in very, let's say, customer oriented situation, or also in field work, and they just get some support in for very specific tasks, and this has huge potential to actually redesign processes. And that's where I see actually the biggest step happening. So because if we want to really create value with the technology, we have to completely redesign the way we work, and especially in enterprise, we know that a lot of the traditional enterprise applications, they are very old-fashioned. They have been created a long time ago. They are not yet up to speed. So in our private lives, we use technology that is much more modern eventually, and enterprises now have to somehow do the next step and actually also integrate a lot of these, I don't know, more intuitive and intelligent technologies in their day-to-day operations.
So maybe actually one of the challenges, what makes companies progressing slower, because this amount of reimagination of business processes, re-engineering, it's really hits a core part of the businesses, which you really need to know what you are doing. I think what I'm also often think, because of the speed you have mentioned, what are the things which you need to continue build? What is the foundation? What you should not keep an eye on? And what are really the new things? And what sometimes also the thing is not completely the new, but is some kind of reshapen, like data governance, master data, the fact that you need to have a data quality under control. These are like evergreens, right? So how for the companies, how you balance, how you can create this foundation that you are ready for the technology when it matures.
If you don't mind, I will answer with a question first. Uh, Building this data foundation in itself doesn't bring value. It may eventually bring value, right? But it's an approach which is an investment, hoping that value will be generated from this data foundation. And what has hurt AI, whether it's traditional AI or Gen AI now, what has always hurt AI is quantifying the value that AI is bringing to a company. So we're seeing potential. We feel like, this should help with the mundane task, as you said, Christine. But how do we actually quantify cost reduction or top line, right? So how is it? It's even traditional AI. Now it's even truer with generative AI because the investments are so massive that we better get some quantified value out of those tools. But traditionally, I was always hurt by that as well. So, what do you think, Christine?
I can actually comment on that, and this is not specific to AI. Also,
Yeah.
it's a very common problem in measuring actually the impact of IT investments, and it is known as IT paradox. And I think there are a couple of really tricky aspects to it. So, on the one hand, you invest typically much earlier than you see the benefits. So you invest, for instance, in preparing data in training models. And the actual value comes when this is productively used by a larger number of employees, or in a business process integrated into automated ways of working. And that creates typically this gap between investments or time gap or lack between investments and value. So value will be created over time. Another aspect that's also quite interesting is you invest in one, in a central, perhaps data platform or development of AI models, but the value is created perhaps in other parts of the organization, or perhaps even with your customers or your suppliers. So in the end, like if you really would like to, and there's this IT paradox actually is actually the observation that you cannot show um, gains from IT in these productivity statistics, or really in the statistics at the macroeconomic level, because of these issues in where you actually measure and what you measure. If you look at it from a company perspective, I think you still can logically basically show what the impact of AI, for instance, is, because you are, for instance, making people more productive, or you're scaling certain work practices, or you create better individualized offerings for your customers and thereby have some better customer retention or revenue growth. I mean, it's the general logic of how technologies eventually create value. But every company has to really understand that, and also very clearly um, or be very clear about these links and where you invest and how you measure also. And it's not the bottom line or the top line, but oftentimes you need to have like intermediate measures. Customer churn or retention or process improvements. So measure something that is not directly basically the financial value, because there are a lot of indicators that eventually would be just indirectly or linked to a P&L, for instance.
I think it's always a super important step to link whatever AI solution we are developing with what business problem we are solving. And from articulating it, we are really hitting key KPIs, key business indicators, and the performance. And I think that if we are able to articulate how the AI solution is going to impact these measurable indicators, every head of company will be super happy. And it's tricky, but I think that's something which needs to be really done very carefully. So we are not also talking only about value creation, but realization, and this realization should really be in business measures.
But there's also a very interesting aspect to it. Because we are at the moment in this generative AI hype. I mean, this is a technology that if you use the standard tools, they're available to everybody. And of course, they make us as individuals more productive. I mean, if you write an email or whatever, or prepare a presentation. So we have lots of these examples. And that's also what the current studies eventually tell you. So there's widespread adoption in this individual level use. Everybody is a little bit more productive. Does that help our organizations to create more value? Difficult to say. Um, but on the long run, this is a technology that will be available to everybody. And talking about like where AI creates value, so then it's a little bit about also understanding where you want to differentiate from your competitors, or where you want to strategically actually invest in bringing your own data, for instance, training own models, developing, perhaps a small language model that represents some knowledge in your business domain. So this is the key question. So, the general purpose, Gen AI, I think everybody can use, should use, but it will just lead to a kind of increase in productivity for everybody. And then we have to really think about like this value creation, as you said, and measure also what is created. But we cannot expect that just the use or the deployment of, GPT like tool inside an organization. And we see that in many of the Swiss companies, but also international companies, that creates any competitive advantage. That's just the standard ways of working, like we did word processing in the past.
Oh, and actually, there along those lines, what we see also is that a lot of employees are jumping on these Gen AI, but it's again the GPT version of a Gen AI, right? So large language models, ChatGPT and others. Well, what we see, one of the problems we see is that what has been vetted by a company as a tool that was accessible to the employees is not necessarily what employees want to use. And so we see a lot of shadow AI as well, which is creating a bit of a problem there because, the data that is supposed to be sensitive and confidential is sometimes shared with the large big techs in the U.S. So this is one issue that we see with these tools. The other issue that we see with these LLMs and the GPT likes, as you said, Christine, is that a lot of the companies are building their own flavor of a GPT for their employees, whether it's used or not. The problem is that it's hiding the fact to a certain extent that you still need to work on the data of the enterprise. You still need to consider your own data as a strategic asset that you have to develop, that you have to nurture, that you have to curate. And what we see is that in some cases, some companies believe that they can surf the AI wave without having to do the tedious work of having a true data foundation, as you said earlier, Alice.
And how do you see it? So it means that unstructured data are now in spotlight, and it not necessarily these data were in a spotlight before Gen AI, right?
It is true. So we have answers to unstructured data now, but unstructured doesn't necessarily mean high quality data either. So and actually it's on the contrary. Unstructured data is usually not of relatively low quality. And that doesn't help Gen AI, right? I mean,
Yeah.
again, these tools need high quality data, whether it's unstructured or structured. So having unstructured data and just blindly saying it's fine, I have a Gen AI tool that will figure it out is, probably a shortcut.
It's also interesting. I mean, if you look at data in an enterprise, so 90% of the data is typically unstructured data, documents, images, increasingly also videos. And of course, this is suddenly actually an asset that you could leverage, but nobody has had actually the interest. And I mean, to really, I don't know, create metadata on that, or to really also even store it in a very structured way. And we see that in a lot of the RAP projects at the moment that, yes, you would actually like to expose a lot of documents, and I don't know, policies or product documentation. So there are many examples and actually very many good use cases. But if you look also at it from a data quality perspective, suddenly it matters. So if you have a certain consistency, if you have, for instance, some way, or like even like the structure of the document may play quite a bit of a role, or you need contextual information. So there's a documentation of your product version XYZ. So there are many of these topics that we actually looked into when knowledge management, for instance, was a big topic, when we still had much more difficult access to documents and had to to manage documents better. We cared about a little bit like storing them in a structured way. But this has not been done by most companies in the past years because search was very easy. And now with generative AI, you have to actually get back and establish some way to eventually make this data ready for AI or for generative AI. And that's quite an interesting aspect to it. And it's a lot about context, understanding the context in which this document can be used, also who can use it, whether it's sensitive information. And a lot of the Microsoft Copilot or ChatGPT or RAG instances actually expose all the difficulties that we have in suddenly exposing some sensitive information or IP relevant documents. And so unstructured data management, in our experience in the Competence Center of Corporate Data Quality, all large companies are aware of it, probably the smaller also, but we work mostly with large companies, but nobody has yet a good approach that actually scales. It's done use case by use case.
So what
AI
would be
tool.
what would be your recommendation? of these three things you would recommend? A big
I would, and I think that's a recommendation in general. A company or management should have an understanding of the data landscape. And there's lots of data. I mean, you will never have 100% data quality. It's very costly. So, and also not all data is relevant, but you should understand what is really the assets of the organization. And this can be done with a simple map. I mean, it's customer data, product data, and typically you have a couple of, you have data in your transactional system, you have a master data, but also documents associated to that. So having, I don't know, very simple um, map that helps you actually also then to understand what is more valuable, what is less valuable, and where do you invest is probably an important aspect. Then I think you have to work a little bit on responsibility. So, I mean, who can actually define what you want to know about your customer, your products, and what documents you would actually want to use. This is nothing that you can delegate to an IT person. It's something that is really core business knowledge. And so you need to have responsibilities in business. And third is eventually really establishing I think it goes along with also understanding the potential of AI and data, but also understanding the obligations. And oftentimes we talk about these data citizens that have to understand their rights so they can use data in all types of AI. But on the other hand, they also have obligations. So they have to, for instance, invest in quality or do not, I don't know, recreate information again and again, but rather use the, I don't know, trusted source. So it's really about a lot about developing data practices at a large scale with every employee and of course with the help of data experts.
I think it's very visible that the adoption in the companies is absolutely fundamental if the potential of these technologies should be really benefited. What would be also your tips, how to drive the adoption of the organization? What is important in that aspect? Is it only training, or what kind of training, what kind of education?
Training, you mean, okay, so you mean education. I think education is key. So making sure that, and I think it's education that starts with the top management, with the board, understanding, demystifying AI a little bit, because there is a lot of hype, as you said. We need to educate the top management to cut through the hype. Um, you know, I'm sure that many at the top management level get a call every other day from a company saying, we can solve, we have, the solution for you, basically, right? And it's very difficult in their position to actually not, know what to filter out, basically. So basically getting a level of education that allows you to cut through the hype and be able to filter out uh, what is, hype versus, what is actually potentially real. I think this is one key aspect of pushing for adoption. Once they understand that, they will also understand the value of a data foundation, which is not always it's not always the case. They know they need to do something about the data, but they hope they don't have to spend too much on it. So understanding really the value of data, if what you want to build is sustainable solution, because adoption comes with sustainability. You don't have adoption through a pilot that will stay on the shelf. You have adoption through sustainability, but for sustainability, you need a strong foundation layer around data and the right governance around it. And I think as long as the top management understands it and understands what kind of investments this requires, I think this actually can push, can be a good catalyst for a sustainable adoption of these AI tools.
And what about the rest of the organization? What?
Yeah,
Hmm?
I think it's actually training and literacy. I mean, it's a big topic, but it's also a quite difficult one. What I see a lot is you do a company-wide literacy program, and everybody has to, I don't know, listen perhaps to, I don't know, some online training or gets perhaps or podcasts exactly on AI or Gen AI. But often it's a little bit technical or disconnected from the actual reality. So in the end, training is good. So you have to understand basic concepts. But in the end, for most employees in an organization, you need to actually connect it to their work environment. And of course, Gen AI has a different meaning for people in marketing or in, I don't know, operations, in finance and so on. So actually, and a lot of these, um, I think, if as we are in a transformative technology, it's not that you just have to train somebody with a new system or something, but you have to actually develop new work practices. So I'm a big promoter actually of data literacy trainings that are more conceptualized as a kind of learning experience where the employees are actually also encouraged to develop new ways of working or think about new ways of working. And that's not evident because no provider can provide that. And this is perhaps an opportunity also for universities, for EPFL, for HEC Lausanne also to engage, because we have a lot of young students that are eager to also work with the technologies, and bringing them together with experienced professionals and develop together very realistic ways of using the technology in a specific work context with all the constraints that you have with all the old legacy systems. That oftentimes is frustrating for the young people because it's not the fancy newest technology, but it's extremely valuable to create something that can work, new practice that works in a specific environment. So I think we really have to bring together um, innovation, but also the reality of most of the enterprises. So
And
that's a little bit like here.
I think this is a very, very good point. What I very often see is that basically AI use cases, an idea how AI or data can be really benefited, should come across the organization also bottom up. Because the experts who really understand day-to-day business, if they trust and understand the potential and what data and AI can do, they can come with a lot of ideas. And it's not only that they should basically drive the demand, they should also be the ones who adopt it and use it in day-to-day. And that's basically linked back to the value realization. And I think that really requires not only the knowledge itself, it's a certain mindset and imagination, and that really requires what you say, the combination of expertise and really the technology itself.
But would you agree that if you want AI to be sustainable within the company, that you need a transformation? And the transformation also comes from the top. Because
Absolutely.
there is an organizational change that is required. Of course, there is a cultural change, which you addressed, and
Yeah.
I would agree as well, of course, to that. But I mean, there is also a top-down approach. So it's a combination of a bottom-up and a top-down approach that is
Absolutely.
required to make AI sustainable. Again, have an AI project as a pilot, and both the domain experts and the data scientists are working hand in hand, and to a certain extent, it's being adopted. But if you know you if not all the ingredients are in place, this is just going to be abandoned 6 months or a year down the road. If you want to make it sustainable, there is a transformation, a radical change that
I
needs to
think
take place.
that's what we come to the word transformation. And that's maybe why it is so complicated, because it needs to be top down, bottom up. It needs to be so much tightly linked with strategic objective of the company. And I think it's also not like a one-time event. The technology, if you see how, and you were mentioning the speed, it must be continuous process. So it needs to be basically embedded in DNA of the organization from top to bottom. And it's very easy to say it like that. It's much harder to do it in the context of a specific business, which is facing very specific challenges.
And your comparison to IT, I was actually, maybe it's a good point to ask you the question. IT is seen as a support function.
Mhm.
Should AI be seen as a support function? Where should AI sit, right, for this transformation to take place? IT is not. I mean, can we say IT has transformed the company? Maybe with the backend systems, with SAP at some point. But I mean, where should AI sit, and will it?
Very difficult question. And if you, I mean, we are in contact with a lot of actually chief data officers, chief AI officers, and that's a continuous question. So, and even if you look at the statistics, you see some of them report into a IT function, some of them report into a business function, and very few actually are very close to the board. We also have to say, and in the end, so if we want to drive transformation, I think it's absolutely important that the board is very closely involved. So you cannot just delegate, I don't know, transformation to somebody in a, I don't know, organizational box or whatever this is. And then the question is a little bit like, typically in an organization, and there, I think the organizational reality, the functional silos kick in. It's very hard to actually find responsibilities, or like board members also have a little bit like a transversal or a cross-functional role. So the biggest problem is, of course, if you, I don't know, for instance, delegate AI is now only, I don't know, our sales and person's responsibility or finance person's responsibility. Oftentimes you get a specific perspective on how people look at it. If you delegate it to IT, you may have a very, let's say, not strategic perspective, because people understand the technology, but perhaps not the strategic or the priorities, or they are not at least directly responsible. So in that regard, it's really a tricky question, and you probably have to still find some reporting line on the one hand. Obviously, the CDOs and CIOs that are reporting to business functions are typically, I think they are better able to also drive the transformation because they have stronger business engagement. But in any case, you have to find some structure, be it through councils, be it really through big initiatives, enterprise-wide initiatives, to engage everybody and bring everybody in.
I think it's, because of its transformation, it really is a journey. And the setup might evolve based on the maturity which we are reaching. Normally, when a business needs a new capability, which can be AI, but something else, there must be somebody initially who is in charge, very close to C-suite. But our intention should be always that we disseminate that knowledge across the whole organization and go more like a federated or decentralized. So there are units which the responsibilities are there in a center only for what really needs to be centralized. However, the business units have a high degree of independence. And I think that's basically what should happen also for AI eventually, that it really is the thinking, the approach, the knowledge is spread across the whole organization. But that takes time.
Mm. It's also very interesting. I mean, we have seen that, and I completely agree. So if you have little competencies and try to really define the approach, it's absolutely critical that you have a core team, um, typically very closely discussing on what the approach is, but also to develop some of the very foundational skills, to actually create, I don't know, work on some use cases, create a little bit like foundational platforms and so on. So this is nothing that you can do in a very decentralized way.
Absolutely.
And I think at the moment, one of the risks is some companies, they are so, I know, enthusiastic also about technology, that they think, okay, we can just have a very decentralized approach, which is probably good. But at one point in time, you're hitting a wall, because there are a lot of capabilities that are actually enterprise-wide. So if you have, I don't know, 10 platforms for data and analytics, it just is a problem, because you get a very fragmented approach. So you need to have some, I think, coordination. Also, all the regulations, governance topics will never be, or you will never be able to address yes, regulations to data protection aspects. if you are completely decentralized. And so I recently heard actually a CIO saying governance is something that needs to be centralized. But innovation, on the other hand, all the use cases, the work can very easily um, actually be decentralized. And you have to find this balance between very central and decentralized ways of working. And it's clear the use cases have to be very close to business. And on the other hand, you have to have some groups that eventually create architectures, foundational top standards. Yeah, exactly. Also, like some very specialized knowledge will always be in some central teams.
Yeah.
If I may, I have another question, actually. I've been asking myself that question for quite some time, but I don't necessarily have a clear answer, and I wanted to pick your brains on that. So, I mean, we're talking about adoption, and it's a very key question. But um, A- AI is so basically transformation is a disruption.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And the question is, should companies in a leading position take the risk of disrupting themselves potentially too soon, too early? What would be the advice for these companies that feel like they're in a safe spot for now? They might get disrupted by a startup coming from another country. How can we What advice, what recommendations could we have for those companies to be in a resilient position without having to disrupt themselves? And is it even possible?
Yeah. I think this is very, very tricky question for any top boss of any company. And, for me, it's always think big, start small. So I will always, if I'm in charge of the company, do some packets of experimentation to experiment in my business domain, in my context, and I would like to see some successes. And I would be using it like a showcases and also with my senior colleagues to make some judgment calls, how fast and how to which direction we want to go. But I think that in these very strong topics like AI, you need to face it somehow because you can be out of the race very soon. And if you miss some, important phase, it's going to be very quickly, it will be very difficult to catch up. But, it's like, that's why maybe those guys are paid so much money, because you really need to make a very fundamental call. And then you need to take accountability for it.
Of course.
And perhaps also to make it very clear, I mean, strategic management, eventually you have to scan the environment, what is happening, how technology changes, but also how competition changes. So in the end, probably it's about strategic management. So thinking a little bit about, I don't know, the perspective of next 1-2 years, looking a bit along the line and working with scenarios and experimenting with scenarios. So if you do not do that, I would say you are in a pretty tricky situation as an organization these days.
Yeah.
And a lot of the traditional industries should face that. And perhaps they will not be disrupted. So, but at least they should also consider the scenarios um, where the risks are, and perhaps even, I mean, it's in management. There's this concept of ambidexterity. So you have to innovate, and on the other hand, still also exploit and stay in your core business. And this is at the moment what we're seeing very much in the AI space. So
Yeah. I think, you know what, you will be disrupted. So you need to pick up whether you want to be internally disrupted, which you might control, or you will be for sure externally disrupted. So the disruption will come, and there would be one thing that to add. But I think the fundamental is how you are going to align your strategic intent of the company with AI and data, and that's a continuous dialogue. And I think that actually is going to drive this internal disruption if you are clear on that.
And I mean, part of my reflections along those lines is, that before you become an AI company, you need to first become a data company. And so again, back to what we discussed, building this data foundation and accepting to actually, invest in that, because this is only what can make AI sustainable eventually. Doing pilots here and there, you still haven't tackled the difficult problem that takes years.
But I would not recommend to do data first.
Okay.
Because it has to go hand in hand. So you really have to orchestrate the transformation, but you have to build very strategically and set your priorities.
For me, the conclusion always is that companies are not becoming data AI driven. It's people who do. And whatever technology you are going to use, you have ambition. You always need to count with your organization, people, and adoption. I don't know what you think, because that, for my perspective, is actually the biggest challenge each time and all the time.
So going back to what we said earlier, what you see is an important first step is the bottom-up training,
Yeah.
bottom-up education,
Yeah.
making sure that it's instilled into the company from the bottom.
Yes.
Okay.
I think in the end, it comes back to linking top down and bottom up, and not leaving out middle management, by the way, because that's also a common learning that oftentimes, so you basically have to address all parts of the organization in a transformative journey. And of course, you have to change a lot on the people side, on the organizational side. But on the other hand, you also need very good technological competencies, and you need people who understand what they can do also from a managerial perspective. So I find it a very fascinating learning journey on the one hand side, but also a very interesting strategic challenge for companies in all industries. And so today, we say that for a long time, every company, maybe in the most traditional industry, it's a data and an AI company. So you need to somehow get involved.
And if I were to just, find some concluding words, I would say also, and I agree. I mean, data first probably is a bit too simplistic. However, uh, we see AI popping up more than we see data initiatives popping up. And so instilling at least the idea that, treating data as a strategic asset of the enterprise is really key and important. And if I were to have also a concluding remark on the AI side, is that, AI may be seen as a hammer. Not everything looks like a nail in a company. And so we need to be driven by the use case and pick the right hammer for the right nail.
Thank you. Hopefully, we will continue the discussion.
You can stop, Will.